The first time I felt hatred like a living thing, it was the color of traffic cones and the sound of a slammed door. My name is Nora. I'm 34, and for most of my adult life I believed the right thing to do was simple. Work hard, be kind, help the people on your block. I ran the community center in our little Midwestern town. After-school programs, a weekend food pantry, holiday drives. It was the sort of job that didn't show up on business pages, but that made a neighborhood feel less like an address and more like a place you could actually breathe in. Then my brother Aaron made a choice that changed the map. He invested with the wrong man, an old friend of a friend who wore charm like cologne and promised easy returns. The scheme collapsed. Small businesses lost payroll, a youth sports program had to cancel its season, and our town's trust fund, the one we'd all chipped into for years, was gutted. People lost money they literally couldn't afford to lose. The paper trail pointed to Aaron's name, transfers he'd authorized, checks he'd signed. He hadn't been the mastermind, but he'd been the facilitator, and facilitation is participation. I remember the first time someone spat the accusation at me like a flat, public fact. It was at the corner store where my neighbor, Tom, kept his paperbacks and his patience. He looked at me with a coldness I'd never seen and said, "Your brother cost my nephew his scholarship." The words landed like gravel in my chest. I turned away fast, because the heat behind someone's gaze can be more lethal than a fist. Hatred arrived as a reflex. I rehearsed speeches in the shower. I imagined standing up at town meetings and demanding he pay. Not just the money, but with his pride, his reputation. I wanted the satisfaction of watching his comfortable life stripped down to the bone. Felt righteous. Felt like justice. Only it didn't feel clean for long. I started keeping count of what we might lose if I let vengeance rule me. The food pantry ran on donations from people who now looked at my family differently. The after-school program relied on volunteers who would not stick around if the center became an activist stage. My brother was my brother, but the kids who lined up on Thursdays for homework help were children who had nothing to do with his mistakes. That was the first subject that complicated my hate. Collateral damage. So I did the adult thing people always say is hard. I chose a plan over a tantrum. First, evidence. If Aaron had papered the mistake, I needed the ledger, not just rumors. I asked him to sit down with me. He was sheepish at first, like a man who expected violence. We laid out the transfers and the checks. He explained with a clarity that hurt. He'd been eager, naive, and flattered into trust. He apologized, but apology without plan is noise. He also gave me the names of the principals he'd worked with and the specific accounts. We copied everything, printed receipts, and cataloged dates. Facts don't soothe, but they do steady a strategy. Second, allies. I couldn't repair what was broken alone. I called my friend Maya, who ran the local bank's small business outreach, and told her bluntly that I needed help building a restitution plan that prioritized people who'd been hardest hit. Maya surprised me by not being moralistic. She was practical. "We'll look for the money trail. We'll prioritize payroll, then promises," she said. She introduced me to Jorge, a tax attorney who volunteers at the clinic downtown. Jorge liked the kind of problems you could solve with a spreadsheet and some stubbornness. Third, timing. Public shaming yields hits and tweets. Public repair yields repairs. I wanted to restore what we could before anger had a chance to destroy the only institutions that mattered. So while people fumed in phone booths and on porches, we quietly reached out to businesses that had lost paychecks and proposed solutions. Interest-free payment plans, community-backed microloans, emergency grants that could be refilled as restitution money trickled in. We drafted a public plan that Aaron agreed to sign. He would work overtime, liquidate assets where reasonable, and commit to a restitution schedule with legal oversight. He was not spared humiliation, but he was given a way to make things right. The first step of repair was the hardest. I had to face the people I believed had judged me unfairly. I organized a meeting at the community center and invited anyone who'd lost money or felt betrayed. I did not expect polite handshakes. I didn't get them. On a folding table, I set out copies of the restitution plan, the timelines, and the names of the people who would oversee compliance. because transparency is both balm and boundary. Aaron sat in the second row, which felt right. Close enough to be accountable, far enough to not dominate. The anger in the room smelled like coffee and old disappointment. A woman named Simone, who taught my kids music classes for free for years, stood up and said, "You ruined my summer gigs. I had to take a second job. I'm tired." The room nodded. That was a sentence I needed to hear. It made the stakes human, not abstract. After that, one by one, people asked hard questions. Who would guarantee payroll? When would we see the first check? Would this be theater or commitment? We answered with facts. Jorge explained the legal framework. Maya spoke about financial timelines. Aaron read a plain apology and then, with shaky hands, outlined the first payments. He volunteered to staff the pantry twice a week and to help build the microloan fund back up. He offered sweat instead of excuses. Sweat is honest currency. It was not immediate reconciliation. Some doors stayed shut for months. Some neighbors refused Aaron's handshake. But something else happened that night. A different pattern emerged. People who had been most harmed became the center of the repair process. They chose who would get the first grants, who would be prioritized for microloans, who would be on the oversight committee. They were not passive recipients. They were partners. That shifted power. And power changes pain into responsibility. There were failures in the plan. A promised donor backed out, unsettled by the drama. A contractor who had been owed compensation waited longer than we'd planned. There were nights Aaron and I argued about how fast to pay. He wanted to move mountains overnight. I wanted to steady the hill. Those conflicts taught us the difference between urgency and recklessness. And then there were the small, surprising moments that felt like balm. Simone came to the pantry on a rain-heavy Thursday and volunteered an extra hour. "This is where the music is now," she said, smiling like a person who'd reclaimed something instead of hoarding pain. Tom, the man at the corner store who'd glared at me, started dropping off bags of bread with a note. "For the volunteers." Little gestures counted. Aaron worked and apologized in ways he hadn't imagined before. He learned the tedious, humbling work of answering phones, correcting ledgers, hosting meetings. He flinched in public. His hands shook when someone asked how much he planned to pay back. But he showed up. Showing up is a kind of love. It was not dramatic. It was daily. Months crawled into a year. We paid back a fraction of what was owed, and the microloan fund began to refill thanks to a community drive and an anonymous donor who'd lost money but believed in second chances. People began trusting again, hesitantly at first, then with more conviction. The youth program returned the following spring. Kids who'd missed a season came back like a chorus hitting the right note. The most surprising shift for me was inside. I had imagined hatred as an instrument to sharpen and point at the man who'd eroded our neighborhood's safety. But hatred crystallized around me too, until I realized it was an unattractive thing to wear. I had been using fury like armor, and armor isolates. When I started focusing on repair, not retribution, I began to see my brother as a complicated human who had done a terrible thing and was trying to make it right. That perspective didn't spare him consequences, but it did open space for something else. A careful, hard, and real kind of love. I don't mean love the way movies sell it. Love as an epiphany, instantaneous and neat. This love was slow and practical. It smelled like hand sanitizer and coffee and the paper of ledgers. It showed up as Aaron standing in the pantry at dawn, handing out rolls he'd stayed up to bake. It showed up as him sitting with Mr. Faraj to rebuild accounts. No excuses, just time and focus. It showed up as him sitting next to survivors of the scam and listening while they told him where their lives had cracked. In time, some people forgave. Others didn't. Forgiveness is a gift people give, not an obligation. But the town healed in the way towns do, by doing the boring, consistent things that make life possible. We rebuilt the trust fund. We started a transparency board to ensure donations were clear and tracked. Aaron started teaching a finance class at the community college, using his mistakes as case studies. He was frank, he was useful. People listened. Looking back now, I can see the shape of the lesson. Hatred is often a short, sharp high. Repair is a slow ritual that eats bitterness away, not by erasing it, but by replacing it with labor. If you want justice to be meaningful, design it to restore where possible and punish where necessary. If you want anger to be righteous, make it practical. Point it at problems, not at people. Anger alone hollows you out. Purpose fills the hollowness. The bakery by the library still drops off a tray of muffins every Thursday. The kids who once missed a season now play on a field with a new scoreboard paid for by the microloan repayments. Tom waves when I pass the corner store. He doesn't look at me like I am fragile anymore. He looks like someone who knows a complicated story and still wants the plot to keep going. My brother and I are not the perfect duo. We have handicaps. Old resentments, stubborn pride, and a memory of what was lost. But we also have a routine of showing up. When I see him hand a bag to a young volunteer, I feel less fury and more an odd, careful pride. He is rebuilding not because he's absolved, but because he finally understands what responsibility means. If you ever find yourself burning with hatred, I'll tell you what I tell myself when the stove gets hot. Count what you could lose if you burn the whole kitchen down. Then choose the work that will feed your street, not your ego. Hatred might feel just for a while. Love that's built by doing, offering time, accountability, and steady hands, is the kind that actually lasts.